Bonsoir. Nous avons donc des traductions en anglais. Alors, monsieur le professeur à Sciences Po, dès que j'ai fait parler, donc 10 secondes, vient de me corriger. Nous avons des interprétations, et non pas des traductions, en anglais, en allemand, et c'est tout, je crois, ou en néerlandais aussi. Non, en néerlandais aussi, Oui, et en français, oui, pardon, et en français. D'accord ? Alors, nous avons, nous, le groupe des Verts, au Parlement européen, organisé cette journée avec Jeremy Rifkin pour une raison très simple. C'est que nous sommes persuadés que de défendre le rêve européen était, dans ces moments difficiles, politiquement, socialement, économiquement difficiles, la meilleure possibilité de nous sortir ensemble du marasme. Mais il faut qu'on s'entende ce qu'est ce rêve, le vert européen, j'allais dire, ce rêve vert européen. Donc nous avons invité, en tant que verts, et c'est ça la chose un peu particulière de la soirée, des non-verts ici, et il y aura des verts qui leur répondront dans la salle. Nous avons invité donc des partenaires, Madame Maria Jo Rodriguez, elle a beaucoup de fonctions, elle est professeure à l'université, etc. Mais c'est surtout elle qui a préparé le fameux sommet de Lisbonne, où elle était la Sherpa, comme on peut dire, du processus de Lisbonne. Donc, bienvenue, Maria Joé Rodriguez, não fala português, mais vous pouvez parler français ou anglais. Martine Aubry est maire de Lille, tout près d'ici. Elle a été ministre de l'Emploi, des Affaires sociales en France aussi. On entend beaucoup parler d'elle en ce moment quand il s'agit de défendre ou de démanteler ou de réformer ou de supprimer la loi des 35 heures, etc. Martine défend une idée à l'intérieur de la gauche française qui est l'idée de la gauche solidaire. Donc vous avez une idée de la gauche durable et vous avez une idée de la gauche solidaire, solidaire avec la société et solidaire entre eux de la gauche, si j'ai bien compris. Donc Martine est, si vous voulez, celle qui nous parlera du point de vue d'une certaine idée de la défense de l'identité sociale de l'Europe à travers son expérience en tant que ministre et maire de Lille. Puis nous avons, Puis nous avons pour beaucoup de Verts l'ami américain, Pascal Lamy, qui a été commissaire chargé donc de l'OMC, chargé donc du commerce international, qui connaît tous les Verts de par leur prénom. Il a appris à les aimer, à être énervé par eux, mais il est toujours resté très calme. Et donc, si on veut, le rôle de Pascal ce soir, ce sera de faire un peu pas de défendre le rêve américain, mais s'il a envie, il défendra le rêve américain aussi, mais de nous expliquer si on a une vue peut-être un peu trop étroite quand on oppose rêve européen et rêve américain. Donc tu vois, tu es bien encadré et tu n'en sortiras pas. Hein ? Donc Pascal Lamy, qui est candidat à la présidence de l'OMC, et qui est président d'un centre de recherche qui s'appelle Notre Europe, qui a été fondé par Jacques Delors, et pour tout dire, il a été chef de cabinet de Jacques Delors quand celui-ci était président de la Commission. Voilà, j'en oublie, mais ça fait à peu près le tour. D'accord ? Bon. Et puis enfin, nous avons Jeremy Rifkin. Alors, Jeremy Rifkin, I don't want to present him, because he will present himself. It is part of his speech to present himself, so I don't dare to do this. We invite him, and we invite you, Jeremy, because we are fascinated by the way that an American defends the European dream. So the night today, the debate will be like this. Jeremy will make a large explanation of his view of the European dream and why the European dream has more future for him than the American dream. Then we will have not statement but position by the other participants of the panel. After this first round, there will be 3 green who will have a statement questioning the position who has been defended here. Then we go back to the panel, and then we go back to the question, and then we try at the end to go out, and we are all more intelligent. This is the thing that we want to get tonight, to go out after 2.5 hours, and we are all more intelligent and happy to be more intelligent. This is what we aim to do tonight. So, Jeremy, it's your turn.
Good evening, everyone. Nice to be here. You can set your watches. I've been told I get 55 minutes, and if I go a minute over, don't say anything. All right. My father, Milton Rifkin, he was born in 1908 in Denver, Colorado, on the western frontier. My mother, Vivette, was born in El Paso, Texas, on the Texan-Mexican border in 1911, still doing great at 93 years old. My siblings and I were born in the West, in Colorado. When we were little babies, we moved to Chicago, and we were raised in a working-class neighborhood on the south side of that city. Policemen, firemen, people who worked in the steel yards, the stock yards, and my mother still lives in that same house 59 years later. I was raised in the heartland of America, the heartland. And I was raised on the American dream. It was catechism. That dream, stripped to its essentials, is very simple. Regardless of the station to which you're born, if you get a good public education and work hard and are diligent to the task, you can become a success in the United States of America. It's the land of opportunity. For 150 years, the dream was robust. Remember, even as late as 1960, we were the most middle class of all the societies in the world 40 years ago. Today, unfortunately, I have to report to you the dream has unraveled in 40 years in my lifetime. Today, the United States ranks 24th among industrial countries in income disparity. That is the gap between the very rich at the top and the multitudes of working poor at the bottom. Only Mexico and Russia rank lower. That's why a new survey by the Ford Foundation says that only 51% of Americans still believe in the dream. A third of Americans say we don't believe in the American dream anymore. This is a surprise, isn't it? This is the social glue. This is what keeps America together. It's a kind of a covenant. When I look at another American and we look at an immigrant to America, we got an understanding. Hard country, tough country, but land of opportunity. If you make it, I don't envy you, I congratulate you. The reason there's so much fear and polarization and almost hatred in America today is we are in trouble and we don't want to acknowledge it and have a conversation. We're losing the vision. We're losing the moral cachet. And the last taboo is to try to entertain a conversation, is the American dream need to be rethought? On this side of the Atlantic, a powerful dream emerging. It's taken 50 years, really since the end of World War II. What's interesting about this dream to me is it's the mirror opposite of our dream. But it may be a better fit for a globally connected world. I should say at the get-go, if you ask a European what's the American dream, they can tell you. When I published this book, I would ask people, what's the European dream? And they say, what? Only Americans can dream. But what I have seen is that in a kind of a stealth way, 3 generations of Europeans have begun to create a dream, and it's a good thing you didn't know it was one, because you would probably have argued it to death in some committee. But at least now it's here. Let me be frank about something. You Europeans, you're always wondering about America, talking about America, angsting about America. What does America think? How does America feel? Can I let you in on a little secret? We never think about you. Never. Does this surprise you? You're not on our radar screen. Now, that's not exactly true. We do think about you when it's time to vacation. No, but this is very serious, because when it's time to revitalize our spirit, feed our soul, get back in touch with our humanity in the more important parts of life, we flock to Europe. There must be a message here. But when we think of institutional Europe, we normally think the following in the heartland of America: anti-market bias, inflexible labor, pampered workers, aging population, bloated government bureaucracy, and a welfare system near collapse. Do I have it right? There may be a germ of truth to this, but what we're missing, and what many in Europe are missing, is there's another skin, a new skin below the old skin, and we're not seeing its relevance. 455 million human beings across 25 member states, from the Irish Sea to the doorsteps of Russia, have forged a union, a political union. This is the strangest political experiment in history. I understand. I speak often with EU officials and European leaders, and no one quite knows what the European Union is here. Actually, everyone's confused. Why? There's no precedent. If you look back in history, every nation, every empire, every kingdom, and all of history is born in violence, coercion, revolution in the streets, seizing people, territory, resources. The EU is totally counterintuitive. 1945, your parents and grandparents looked at the rubble and they said, we can't do this anymore. 1,000 years of conflict, the bloodiest continent in the world. More people have shed more blood in Europe than anywhere on this planet. 2 world wars, the Holocaust, and in 1945 said, it's over. Put down the sword. We're going to have to learn to create a new political experiment based on cooperation, trust, reciprocity, and waging peace. Immanuel Kant's perpetual peace. This is a strange political agency. And this is the first transnational space. It's not a nation state. It's not a global state. What is this? I call it network politics. You know, Henry Kissinger once said, if I call up Europe, who answers the phone? We have an answer for him. Everyone. You understand? In networks, no one party can dominate. So there's this constant, excruciating, agonizing attempt to create consensus so everyone can get their agenda passed. Does this sound familiar here, MPs? You have the corporations, the NGOs, and the governments, and the nation states, and the corporations. Networks are agonizing, excruciating, difficult. Who's in charge? Why can't we get anything done? But they work because they're so redundant. The democracy is so horizontal that they slowly move to the next stage. And every stage where the European Union was to make the leap to the next stage, we said it will fail. And at every stage, the European Union defied the odds. Network politics, horizontal-based power, no simple command and control at the top. It's interesting to me that 1/3 of young Europeans between the ages of 18 and 31 say they now feel they are European first. That doesn't mean they give up their nationality or their region. They've just gained another identity. It took me 20 years of commuting back and forth to Europe to realize that actually Americans think fundamentally different than Europeans. I thought it was just a style difference, a language. No. When an American parent teaches their child of what freedom is, which is the core of our dream, we have a completely different set of ideas in mind than when your parents teach you what freedom is, which is the core of your dream. Our parents teach us that freedom is self-reliance, independence, autonomy, and mobility. That's why we love the automobile. And so our taste of freedom is when we get behind that driver's wheel and we know that we're self-sufficient, independent, and no one tells me what to do. I'm on my own, swim or sink. I'm responsible for my life. You're responsible for your life. It's a tough country. The government's not going to help me. My neighbors aren't going to help me. I better learn to be self-sufficient. That's the American way. No continental European parent teaches their child that. I'll leave the Brits aside for a minute because I'm not sure what's going on over there. It's almost a bridge between the two, actually. But a continental European parent teaches their child that freedom is the quality of your relationships, the extent to which you're connected and have access to communities. Because the more embedded, the greater the quality of your relationships, the more choices do you have for a fulfilling life. So you ask an American, what's the American dream? That I should make something of my life. Ask any European in this room, what's your dream? A better quality of life for my children and those yet to come. The reason is, you need to sit. No more cameras, please. The reason is, to understand the American dream and why people voted the way they did in November, because you're always asking, how could Americans vote the way they do? You need to understand it's always about the American dream. And it's always about saying which candidate we think is the keeper of the flame. The American dream is a European transplant. Our founders came to America 200 years ago during the waning stages of the Protestant Reformation, the early stages of the Enlightenment in Europe. We took those two currents of European thought at the time, we froze them for 200 years. The American dream is a European transplant. If Martin Luther would come back today, am I right in saying he'd be far more comfortable in the heartland of America than the heartland of Europe? Correct? If Adam Smith were to come back today, architect of market capitalism, he'd feel very comfortable in America. We're the fiercest champions of the marketplace. The Reformation and the Enlightenment were very different ideas. And many Europeans say, how can you Americans be so religious and so materialistic at the same time? The Reformation says, suffer with Christ and your reward is eternal salvation. The Enlightenment says, no, pursue happiness and your reward is progress. Very different ideas, but what connects them in the eyes of every American? The individual is at the center of both currents of thought. Martin Luther said, you stand naked and alone with your God. No priesthood, no church, no Vatican. You stand alone. Adam Smith said, you stand alone to pursue your self-interest in the marketplace, alone. John Locke said, you stand alone against the forces of nature, harness it. We were alone. It was a frontier. We didn't have a lot of social solidarity and support. We had to learn to be self-sufficient. That's why the cowboy on the horse became our icon. Later, the automobile as a surrogate. So being independent and autonomous and mobile, being an island to ourselves, being responsible for our own fate, this is what America's all about. In the end, we all believe we go it alone. That doesn't mean we don't have community and civil society, but at the end, this is a very individual culture. In Europe, you had an older tradition that tempered the individualism of the Reformation and the Enlightenment. You had the paternalism of the Catholic Church, fortress-walled cities, feudal society. So you had almost a hierarchical kind of communal sense of relationships that tempered the individualism of the Reformation and the Enlightenment. So in the 20th century, after World War II, you ended up with a social economy, market capitalism, but also redistribution of the fruits and benefits through government. So, the American dream, the European dream. The American dream focuses on personal accumulation of wealth. It's not an end. Many of my European friends say, oh, you Americans, all you care about is money, money, money. That's just not true. For Americans, money is a means to an end. The end is freedom, self-sufficiency, because our parents teach us the government's never going to take care of you, nor the community. You got to take care of yourself, so you better have enough property so you won't be a drain on society. The European dream focuses much more on quality of life. You always talk about quality of life here. That's not on the radar screen in the heartland of America, that term. The reason is, in America, you could get rich. Cheap land, free land, you could go from rags to riches, so individual wealth counted. In Europe, you had the older feudal society, class station, so you couldn't just naturally get rich. So you settled for an alternative, quality of life. The whole community taxes itself, and then you raise everybody's boat with their context being a good quality of life in the community. Individual dream, more of a collective dream. The American dream focuses on the work ethic. We work longer hours, those of us who have jobs, than the Koreans. Number one, American work hours. Europeans say, you Americans don't get it. You're constantly having to be productive. You can't smell the roses. You live to work. We Europeans, across Europe, we choose to work to live. Or as my wife says, the deathbed test, because I'm a workaholic. She says, you know anyone on their deathbed that ever said, oh, I regret I didn't spend another hour over at the office? Maybe I could answer a few emails before I kick off. Europeans get it. The American dream focuses on property rights and civil rights because they are an extension of our individuality. If I have property, I'm independent. If I have the right of speech, assembly, press, and the right to have a gun, I'm independent. Europeans don't spend as much time on property and civil rights. You spend a lot more time on social rights, universal health care, everyone should have retirement benefits, maternity leave, and you spend a lot of time on what you call human rights. Jimmy Carter talks about it, but I can tell you in my family, which is an intelligent, college-educated family, I've never heard the term, universal human rights. I've never heard that term. The American dream focuses on assimilation. We do better at immigration than you do. We struggle, but we're not afraid of new blood, but we have a condition. Come to America, we'll accept you, but get rid of your former cultural ties and get into the melting pot. Be a free agent in the market. In Europe, in theory, we'll get to practice, but in theory, multicultural diversity, the slogan of the European Union is unity in diversity. What? In diversity, correct. The American dream focuses on growth. We don't like the frontier. We want to tame it and make it into a shopping center if we can. The European dream focuses more on what you call sustainable development, not on the radar screen in Middle America. The reason actually has to do with density. In America, if you've noticed when you traveled, you'll see a town that's 30 years old and falling apart, and the next city's brand new. Because in America, if we foul the nest, we just move into the next cornfield and settle it as a city. In Europe, you were so densely populated by the 18th century, you couldn't foul your nest. You had no more space. So when you go over any part of Europe, even the poorer parts, you'll see that space is used in a much more careful manner. That's what made you the long-distance runner when it comes to things like the Biodiversity Treaty, the Global Warming Treaty. It's part and parcel of the understanding that you're connected, whether you like it or not, you're embedded, and you have a responsibility because there's no other place to go. The American dream focuses heavily on religion. We're the most religious of any industrial countries. You may roll your eyes, but I can tell you a majority of my fellow Americans, including my family, are deeply religious. It's heartfelt. It's real. A majority of Americans believe in the literal interpretation of the Bible. A majority of Americans believe literally that the devil exists and evil exists. It's not a metaphor. Here's one I do kind of feel is kind of amusing to me as an American. The vast majority of Americans on recent surveys, about 80%, 85%, say they actually believe literally in heaven and hell, but only 4% think they're going to hell, which I think is kind of cute. All right, very confident country. The American dream focuses on patriotism. Of 50 industrial countries, we rank number one on patriotism. Our kids in uniform will die for their country, sometimes protecting your interest, sometimes in wars that we shouldn't be dying for. Europeans say, no, wage peace. We've been down that route. And what the Europeans would say is, patriotism makes you a little nervous. It conjures up the bad old days of the 1930s. It sounds like a relic from the 19th century, nationalism, right? Well, it's not that Europeans don't love their country. If I meet somebody, for example, from Italy, they'll say, oh, I'm from Tuscany. And then tomorrow morning they'll say, I feel Italian. And then next week they'll say, today I feel European. And then maybe the next week they'll say, you know, I'm just a person in the world. Forget all the rest. In America, the identity is more narrow, God and country. We start every talk and end every talk with God bless America. Can you imagine a European politician saying, God bless the European Union? I don't get into local politics. The American dream is heavy into the military, and you don't understand why. It's because we actually do believe evil exists. It's not dysfunctional behavior. When Chamberlain compromised with Hitler, we saw Hitler as actually the devil incarnate. You say, no, no, no. Absorb conflict, wage peace, put out humanitarian assistance, bring people into partnership. That's what the European Union's about. So to sum it up, American dream, very individual. I should make something of my life. I'm responsible for my life, and I like part of that. The European dream, let me lay it out, and then you tell me if this is what you'd like to be. I'm not saying you're living up to any of this. Across Europe, inclusivity. No one should fall too far behind between the rich and poor. We don't let anyone be abandoned totally by society. 2, multicultural diversity. We expect everyone to respect each other's narrative and story. 3, a belief in the quality of life and promoting the quality of life for our children and our community. 4, a belief that we balance work and play. We work to live. We don't live to work. 5, promoting social rights and universal human rights. 6, creating a sustainable world. We have to rely and be dependent on the biosphere in which we live. And 7th, waging peace. Across Europe, wouldn't you say that's what most people would like to be? Now, am I saying you're living up to any of this? Actually, of course not. But dreams are what you'd like to be. They're not what we are. Americans, we've never lived up to our dream. But I could sit here all night and talk about all the ways Europe's not living up to its dream, the hypocrisy, the prejudice, the bias against minorities, the struggle between the wealthy countries and the new accession countries, the democratic deficit. We could spend hours on this. It's not the point, though. The point is, this is the dream of what you'd like to be. This is the legacy that you want to pass on to your children, and it's very, very different than ours. Your dream is the most ambitious dream I've ever heard of in history. It's the first effort by almost 500 million people to create a global consciousness. This is a global consciousness. It may fail. Danny, when you introduced me, you were talking about me being optimistic about the European Union. I think the jury's out. This is such an ambitious dream. I'm not sure if this generation is up to the task. I don't know. You may be the Napster Bertelsmann of politics. Napster Bertelsmann, remember? Their music model lost, but all the music companies followed their lead. I don't know. I'm not sure yet. So, what's the problem here? It's perception. If Americans have a superiority complex, Europeans have a deep inferiority complex. I'm sorry, you're always in our shadow. We Americans overhype our successes. We don't talk about our failures. Not because we're hiding. Failure's boring. That's yesterday. Let's get on with the new idea. With all due respect, my European friends constantly talking about failures, disappointments, things that don't work. I can't go through a dinner without this didn't work, that won't work, that can't work, that was a failure, this won't happen. You know what I'm saying. When is the last time you ever sat around the dinner table talking about successes that you've had? Can anyone recall? Yeah. What I'm saying here is this. There's real-world consequences for the way one perceives one's place in the world. For example, we have this belief that America is this juggernaut, this super giant economic power, and Europe is falling apart, this little old beast ready for the old age home. Reality. I teach at the oldest business school in the world, the Wharton School, in the Advanced Management Program, and I teach a lot of your CEOs in Europe have gone through my program, and America. Can I tell you what the real reality is on the ground? In 2003, the European Union GDP exceeded the United States of America. This year, we tucked ahead of you a little bit. The European Union is the largest exporting power in the world today, not the United States of America. The European Union is the largest internal market in the world today, not the United States of America. 61 of the 140 largest Fortune 500 companies today are European, 50 are American. You lead in key industries. 14 of the 20 largest banks in the world, European, including the big ones. You lead across the board in the entire insurance industry. You lead in aerospace with Airbus. You lead in the construction industry, the chemical industry, the engineering industry. You lead in food, wholesale, and retail trade. These are powerful industries. Now, we lead in auto and software and pharmaceuticals, but to say that America is the only superpower and you're really fading into history is not a sober assessment of what's going on the ground. Here's where the perception breaks down. You're still comparing individual countries to the U.S. You compare Germany to the U.S., France to the U.S., Italy to the U.S., the U.K. to the U.S. But you have to own up. That's not the reality of the companies I work with. Their regulatory regime is not Germany, Italy, and France. It's Brussels. And the companies I work with in Europe see Brussels as the administrative core of their commercial life. So now we've got to start making a different comparison. This is going to be hard to do. We have to compare Germany to California. The largest state in your union, the largest state in our union, Germany wins hands down. It's far more powerful. Now, my German friends get upset, but I say to them, don't get upset. If California were a country, it'd be the fourth largest country in the world. You're just the third largest. Then you got to compare your second largest state, the UK, with our second largest state, New York. The UK wins hands down. Then, this is the tough one. Are you ready? Then you got to compare your third largest state, France, to our third largest state, Texas. This is a difficult exercise. I said this in San Antonio, Texas last week, and I thought they were all going to commit suicide. And it turns out France is more powerful than Texas. Then you got to compare Italy to Florida. Then you got to compare Spain to Illinois. And then you go down state by state in your union, compare it to state by state in my union, and we began to sense the enormity of this experiment, this first transnational space in history. And there are real accomplishments to this dream. It isn't just a dream. If you measure the good life by the paycheck, we Americans are 28% richer than you are. But it's more unequally divided between rich and poor. But if you measure the good life by quality of life, the EU 15 most advanced countries passed us up 10 years ago. Education. At the university and graduate level, I'll have to tell you, the U.S. is right now unbeatable. If you want a good graduate and university education, there are good schools in Europe, but by and large, we've got you beat at the graduate and university level. However, at the elementary and secondary level, 18 European countries this year outperformed our children in math literacy. Healthcare. If you're seriously sick and you can afford the best treatment in the world, you'll come to the Johns Hopkins or Mayo Clinic. Garden variety healthcare, you beat us 10 years ago. 40 million Americans have no health insurance. You have more doctors per population in the EU 15. You live a year longer than we do, which is extraordinary since you smoke so much. I don't know how you do it. It's either the beer, the wine, or the good life. You have much lower infant mortality. We rank 27th in infant death. Why? Because we abandon mothers if they're poor. You have poverty. I understand there's poverty all over Europe, but you don't allow someone to be totally abandoned by the state. Look at the question of leisure. We get 2 weeks off a year. Actually, the average is 4 to 5 days. Can you imagine that? That's 4 to 5 days. The average European gets 4 to 6 weeks, and you get 12 weeks more off a year than we do. Of course, you say, but American productivity is higher. Actually, from the late 1950s to the late 1990s, the EU 15 outperformed us on productivity per hour every year. We caught up. We've now gone ahead of you in the last 2 years. But even in 2003, 7 European countries outperformed our workers in labor productivity, including, as you know, France with a 35-hour work week and Germany. OECD figures. Finally, take the question of safe communities. You normally think prosperous society, safe society. America's counterintuitive. We have 4 times the homicide rate of Europe, even though you have a bigger population. 25% of all the prisoners in the whole world are now imprisoned in my country. 2% of the entire adult male workforce in my country is in jail. It doesn't make me feel good to stand in front of you to say this. I've been a social activist, some of you folks know, for 35 years. I remember the America that was the beacon, the standard for justice, for equity, for middle-class quality of life society. I want it to come back to where it was. But we have to have a sober assessment of reality. And I'm not going to tell you tonight that somehow the European dream's all good and the American dream's all bad. Later I'm going to say there are things Europe can learn from the American dream that are worth salvaging and vice versa. It's a two-way street. So, where does this leave us? Europeans will say in this room, okay, Mr. Rifkin, we've got a global dream. We've got global consciousness. We've got great social programs that show that we meant business. But the dream's over. Wake up. Sober up. We can't afford it anymore. The economy is anemic. We're not growing jobs. We're in eurosclerosis. We're going to have to deconstruct the social benefits, give up the dream, and go to the American economic model. Darwinian, brutal, market-driven, everyone on their own, incentives to the marketplace. You swim, you sink, that's it. Correct? Because Americans know how to grow the economy and provide jobs. Do I have this right? That's not the reality. Many of our economists, my colleagues, come over here and tell you that, and many of your economists were trained in our business schools, and they mouth the same line. Can I give you my assessment of what really is going on in the American economy? We came out of the 1989 to 1992 recession, and we came out of it not because we had superior entrepreneurial talents or we had better ingenuity or because we deconstructed social programs. I'm here to tell you tonight that taking all those social programs and eliminating it have absolutely nothing to do with growing an economy except negative GDP. I want you to just listen to what I just said. It's apples and oranges. You can take everyone off welfare. You can eliminate all the social programs. It has absolutely nothing to do with growing the economy except it grows negative GDP. More prisons, more crime, deteriorating health, polluted environments. The way America grew, and you could try this if you like, after 92, we put out massive credit cards across the country. We went into consumer debt and the biggest buying binge in history, and we're still on it. The average family savings rate in 1990 was 8%. The average family savings rate in Europe today is 14%. Today, the average family savings rate in my country is nearly 0. We have mortgaged the future, and we've continued to go into debt to make the economy move and to keep the whole world afloat with American consumers. This year, more people in my country will file for bankruptcy than file for divorce or get a heart attack or get diagnosed with cancer or graduate college. Does this sound like a healthy, strong economy? And did we create jobs? A University of Chicago study says that even in the halcyon Clinton years when we claimed 4% unemployment, it was 9, equivalent to the EU 15. It's just that our unemployment benefits run out in 6 months. Yours can drag on for years. So if you're on unemployment benefits for years, you're counted as unemployed. In my country, as soon as the benefits run out and you stop looking, we count you as discouraged, not as unemployed. Secondly, we didn't count all the people we brought back to work underemployed. Flex labor, a few hours a week, they're counted as employed. Finally, we put 2% of the adult male workforce in prison. We don't count them. So, The last 4 years, we had a net loss of 1.6 million jobs. The last time that happened was 1929. The stock market crashed. In the last year, we've picked up some jobs. There's no doubt about it, but not making up for the losses. Am I correct or wrong? There's one way to tell. After this lecture, call up and check the currency rates, the worth of the dollar, the worth of the euro, and that's all you need to know. Why is the dollar continuing to be devalued against the euro? Is it just a shell game? No. The international investment community is saying we don't trust the fundamentals. You have consumer debt, credit card debt, you mortgage your homes and now you have mortgage debt. Then the government gave you tax relief and now we have government deficits and trade deficits. We don't trust the dollar. We think it's all based on debt and credit, so we're going to continue to devalue the dollar against the euro until you can show us otherwise. Did anyone think in 1999 the euro would be stronger than the dollar? There must be some reason here. So where does this lead us? It doesn't do you any good to know that America's in trouble, because you're still in trouble. You still have an anemic economy. You're not growing jobs. You're in eurosclerosis. So what's the solution? Let's assume, for the sake of argument, the American model is not the solution. What is the solution? You have a golden goose right here in front of you, and you're starving the goose. You're not feeding the goose. What is the alternative economic model? What is the golden goose? It's the integration of the infrastructure of the biggest potential commercial market in the world that goes from the Irish Sea to the doorsteps of Russia. It's called the European Union. But when you went to Lisbon in the year 2000, your heads of state boasted they would be the most competitive in knowledge economy in the world by 2010. Then the politicians came home, center right, center left, and they played local politics. They played the NGOs and the corporations and the labor unions and the regions. We're giving up too much to Europe. Does anyone in this room really believe that the UK, little UK, France, Germany, Italy, Sweden, does anyone really believe that these countries' prosperity rests with going back into the nation-state container or integrating the biggest commercial market in the world today called the European Union? Here's what we need to do to feed the goose. We need in the next 15 years to create a seamless infrastructure. That means a seamless power grid, hopefully a hydrogen economy power grid in 15 years across the continent. We need a single seamless transportation grid across the continent in 15 years. We need a seamless communication grid across the continent in 15 years. We need a single set of regulatory policies governing commerce, trade, capital, and labor flows in 15 years. We need English as lingua franca for business only in 15 years. If the European, it's already here. Complain, not for social life, because we want to maintain the rich diversity of our cultures, but frankly, it used to be French. It was before that. It was Latin. It may be Chinese. Right now it's English, and your graduate schools are teaching in English and science and business. But here's my point, and we can argue about the language, but here's my point. If you can integrate the infrastructure of the biggest commercial market in the world, wealthier than the United States because you have 455 million people, so you can engage in commerce and trade across the continent of Europe with the same ease that we engage in commerce and trade across the continental United States, you should have a sustainable growth economy that can weather the short term here in Europe. But then you have a second door, and that's fertility and immigration. It's going to be hard enough to integrate the infrastructure. Then you got that second door. You're not reproducing your numbers. Your fertility rate's the lowest in the world. You can increase fertility. Go to Denmark. I understand there are pregnant women all over the sidewalks. You cannot walk in Denmark. Where are our Danish people? What is going on here? What is going on? You're surprised. Something's going on. Bad football team, nothing to do. What it's called is you have better child care provisions for infants. Go to France. Fertility rates are up. My old friend Michel Rocard said to me, why? We start school at the age of 3. There is a place to put our children. I guarantee that more European parents will have children if there was quality child care. And so after this lecture tonight, go home and reproduce. And then make sure you put the right subsidies into child care. But even with this, you got to open up the doors to immigration. 50 million people won't even do a trick. You need much more. And let me say, there's a little bit of fear about immigration. And let me be honest what the fear is. You're worried about Muslim immigration, not just Turkey, but North Africa. And you're worried that they won't respect cultural diversity. In other words, they won't respect every culture. You're worried they may take the unskilled jobs of your high school graduates at cheaper pay. You're worried that there may be crime in the street. You're worried that the welfare system may collapse. And you're really worried that right-wing, xenophobic, fascist political movements will emerge across Europe, which they are, and it'll be the implosion of the European experiment, and you're back to the 1930s, square one. But the way to deal with the fear, I have yet to hear how do you embrace immigration, except to say we're frightened. We can learn a chapter from John F. Kennedy. When John F. Kennedy became president, he said to a generation of baby boomers, ask not what America can do for you. Ask what you can do for America. Can you imagine if some politician were to get up in Europe and say, hey, you know what? Ask not what Europe can do for you. Ask what the young people here can do to make Europe the standard for the global public square and a global vision and a beacon for the rest of the world. Would that be unusual? But here's what John Kennedy did. He actually put the mission. He said, we're going to set up the Peace Corps and the domestic Peace Corps, VISTA, and we're going to let our young college graduates get a little teeny subsistence money to commit themselves to helping other people, to go out in communities around America and around the world and share their skills with each other, because the immigrants have something to share. Why not a European Welcome Corps? Why not take the 1 million Erasmus student graduates and all the other young kids in college, give them a little subsistence salary after school, and then let them go out to the front gates, let them be trained to welcome the young immigrants with job skills, training, break bread, share music. The immigrants have many skills to teach us, many cultural narratives to teach us. Wouldn't that be a great commitment for the next generation of Europeans? I can't tell you how many people went through Peace Corps and VISTA and maintained a commitment to idealism the rest of their life. It changed their life. Last thoughts on as we do this. You've been very patient. I'm not sure how thick this European dream is. I really am not sure how thick it is. I'm not sure how soft or how thick this young generation is. I got to say that in America, the immigrant young people over 150 years were tough, they were committed, they sacrificed for the next generation, and we were the standard. We were the gold standard. The question of how thick this dream is, I think, depends on a number of things, but there's some things you can borrow from us Americans. There are parts of the American dream worth salvaging that will make your dream a common dream and a global dream. Here's what I think about the American dream that needs to be salvaged in Europe. The individualism at the core of the American dream is our strength and our weakness. It was our strength during the frontier because you had to go it alone. You had to be self-sufficient. You had to swim or sink. But in a globally connected world, where we're all vulnerable to behavior somewhere else, no one can define freedom as go it alone. Even Bill Gates, with all of his money, can't be free in the old American sense, I'm an island, I'm independent of everyone else. Because even Bill Gates is not immune to a SARS epidemic, computer virus, global warming, or a terrorist attack, or a stock market scandal. What we can learn from Europeans is solidarity. You do have an understanding that you are part of a larger world, and like it or not, we're vulnerable, interdependent, and we better learn to get along. But what Europe can learn from us, there's a strength in our individualism. And it's not the independence part, it's the personal accountability part. What our parents teach us is you never blame someone else for your life. Your life is your responsibility. You make it as you will. You better take personal accountability for your life. With due respect, sometimes there's a tendency in Europe that I have seen to place responsibility on other people for one's predicament, one's condition. It's the other political party. It's whoever's running the government. It's capitalism. It's socialism. It's postmodernity. There's someone else that's responsible. A global dream requires personal accountability. You can't say the other person or the government's responsible, because then the dream's not thick enough. The other aspect of the American dream that I like is our optimism, our sense of hope, and risk-taking. Show me a defeatist or a pessimist or a cynic or a Eurosceptic, and I'll show you someone that has no dream. Because they're saying tomorrow's going to be worse than today. That's not a political vision for our children's generation. Dreams require hope, optimism, and risk-taking. Because dreams are what we'd like to be, we need to sacrifice and have the confidence that our sacrifice will pay off somewhere in the future. If we could take the American sense of personal accountability, optimism, hope, and risk-taking, graft it onto the European dream, which is about solidarity, then we have a great global vision. Inclusivity, multicultural diversity, good quality of life, balanced work and play, sustainable development with the earth, universal human rights, and peace. We used to say the American dream is worth dying for. The European dream is worth living for. Good night.